Hello, this is Richard Hewitt from Lost Tribes Cafe. I want to talk to you today about this amazing empire, the Scythians, which is an empire which is often overlooked by Western scholars, and something that I consider ethnocentric. There's this the Scythians. They conquered or helped conquer the Assyrians. They defeated the Persians, the great King Darius and Cyrus, and just an incredible empire, decentralized, nomadic. Many nations obviously spun off from the Scythians. It was one of the tools that God used to multiply the descendants of Joseph, of Ephraim and Manasseh, and scatter the seed of Israel into all the nations, just as he promised. And again, the multiplication of Israel was promised in Hosea. So even after the Israelites were gone and Samaria was destroyed and Israel no longer existed as a nation, the promise to the Israelites that they would be multiplied was given to them, and they did through the Assyrians and the Phoenicians and the Cimmerians and the Parthians and other nations like that. They just multiplied, and it happened very quickly. It didn't take the full 2,800 years that we've had since they were destroyed to the present. It happened within a few centuries. And when you study again the Scythians, they were coming against the Greeks, weren't afraid of the Greeks, the great Persian Empire, massive territory, massive influence, huge appreciation for luxuries and quality. They knew how to work with metal, ride horses. Military skill was absolutely amazing. And this all gives evidence that they were from people from Israel who had helped build the great temple of God under King Solomon's time, with the military prowess that they had under Solomon and David, and some of the knowledge that this nation had. They didn't, and they also had a Persian language, a Middle Eastern language, and culture. So it's obvious that that these people who have often been deemed barbarians were very highly civilized. They didn't keep swine. There was one situation where one of their rulers went to the Greeks and partied with them and worshipped some of the Greek idols, and when he came back, he was killed for his idol worship. So this is not a barbarian nation. If anyone was barbarian, it was the Greeks and the Romans and the Persians, who were aggressive and violent and attacking, and so the Scythians really come out as we look at some of the things that the historians wrote about them. Even the Greeks would often write very positive things about the Scythians. When populations that had been under Greeks or Persians suddenly had the opportunity to come under Scythians, they'd often chose to be under the Scythian leadership as opposed to being under Greek or Persian leadership. Why? Because the Scythians were more humane and trustworthy. The word that the Scythians gave, their word was very important. This is also true of the Parthians, who seemed to be descendants of the Scythians. So other empires would often break their word, break treaties or things like that, but the word. And it's interesting also because in Kyrgyz culture, there's something called the man's word. I gave my man's word, and that's something that's very important. And if you break that, your honor is destroyed, and it affects the rest of your life, your reputation, and all. That's not so important in Western culture, where you could lie and change your name and move to a different place and start over again. But in Kyrgyz culture and Scythian culture and Parthian culture, this was all very important. Another really interesting aspect of the Scythians, after they defeated the Assyrians in 623 BCE, so they first attacked in, I think, 650, and the Assyrians defended them. They attacked again in 623, 624 BCE, and defeated the Assyrians. They didn't defeat and conquer the capital, Nineveh, but they just marched right through Assyria into Palestine, their old homeland. Because remember, the Scythians at least the Royal Scythians who lived in what is now Armenia, eastern Turkey, northwest Iran, Azerbaijan, that whole area. It's a place that used to be called Urartu, and it's directly north of Israel. And the Israelites would go. They often fled as their country was failing after the civil war that broke up the confederation that David and Solomon held together. There was a civil war. It broke up, and then Israel became the northern 10 tribes, and Judah became the southern, and they would fight against each other. There were numbers of soldiers that were killed. The prophets were speaking against Israel in the north, saying that they were going to be defeated because of their idolatry, because they'd turned from God, because they had committed adultery against God. So the economy was failing. Baal worship had come in. People were no longer worshiping God. There was a drought that Elijah called on the country. So people had been fleeing, dying. The population had been decreasing. The economy going down. Assyria is getting more powerful, a threat. And it was obvious that the existing staying on in Israel was not an option for many people. So they fled, and many people fled to Judah, where they could worship God. Other people fled with the Phoenicians to Carthage, where they can continue their Baal worship. And many Israelites fled north, directly north to this Urartu. And right during that time, as they're fleeing, as Israel's shrinking in size, the Scythian Empire just kind of explodes onto the historical scene and becomes really a superpower very, very quickly. And one of the Scythians' arch enemies, the same enemies as Israel, were the Assyrians. They attacked in 623, and they moved right through Assyria into Palestine and resettled the land that they'd actually been in before. And Scripture doesn't mention them as Scythians. That was a name given to them by the Greeks. Scripture, at that time, Josiah, one of the few good kings in that era, was king, and he had a great Passover for everyone. And it says that those who were present of Israel, so not just Judah, not just the Jews, but also the Israelites, came and joined the feast, and some from the tribe of Manasseh and other tribes that were present. So some historians, one of them, Stephen Collins, believes that some of these tribes of Manasseh that were present during this Passover that Josiah held for all the tribes were the actual Scythians. And remember, the Scythians were people who were trying to reinstate their faith in God after having lost their nation because of their disbelief. They're trying to turn back to the Lord. And Jeremiah was also a prophet active at this time. And Jeremiah says that faithless Israel is more honorable than adulterous Judah. So he's comparing Israel and Judah at this time, and it's obvious that Israel was on the scene, and there was something, even though they've been so faithless and terrible, there was something about them that was more honorable than Judah at that time. The king of the Jews, the king of Judah, is maybe being influenced by the Scythians. Maybe it's because of them that he's having this great Passover, this famous Passover, reinstating some of the customs and traditions. And then a few years later, he goes throughout the land and destroys all the idols in the land. Again, if these powerful Scythians are in his midst, and there's some sort of brotherly kin connection that they're establishing, and he comes in and they come in, they're maybe asking Josiah, why do you have all these idols around? This is the land of God. Maybe it was their influence that caused Josiah to go not only through Judea, but also up to Israel and destroy all the idols, including some of the idols that had been there for a couple hundred years since the time of Solomon in Jerusalem. So these idols are suddenly destroyed. Historians state that the Scythians were in the land for 28 years. Israel named a city after the Scythians, and after 28 years, the Scythians retreated and went back to Urartu and southern Russia, and then continued to expand in that direction. Fascinating history, fascinating influence on Scripture, and on Josiah possibly. Shortly after that, they left. The Babylonians came in and wiped out Jerusalem. It actually would have been, there might be a little overlap. I need to double check that. But the Scythians seem to be the vehicle, or one of the vehicles God used to multiply the descendants of Israel and scatter them to all nations. Again, many, many nations seem to spin off from the Scythians. And I believe one of them, the Kyrgyz, who I've spent a lot of time with and love, and then also the Chiang in China, the Mizos and the Kukis in India, the Altai people. There's a number of people throughout the Eastern Europe that seem to be descendants of the Scythians. I believe also probably the Kashmirians, Afghans all had, Tajiks also. So all of these nations are nations that seem to have been spinning off, and who knows, maybe a lot more. Anyway, I just wanted to introduce the Scythians, an amazing nation who does not get enough recognition, at least from Western historians. All right, thank you. Until next time, God bless. Bye.